My name is Dr. Robert Chao Romero, and I'm a pastor and professor of Chicano Latino studies at UCLA. If you would have asked me 20 years ago about a book called Brown Church, I really wouldn't know what to tell you, because 20 years ago, my dreams were to become rich and famous, drive a Ferrari, live in a big house on the hill, marry a model, and then Jesus radically got a hold of my life. And as Jesus got a hold of my life, He changed the entire direction of my career, and I felt a calling from God to become a professor and to use that platform to address issues of race and Christianity. As I've been on that journey, I've met many students like Rosa. Rosa was someone that I met several years ago, and her life is kind of like a modern day parable. It was in the local church that Rosa's parents found dignity. They were addressed as hermana, hermano, sister and brother. And it was also in this local church context that Rosa came to know Jesus. Now, Rosa was a top student, and when she graduated from high school, she gained a scholarship to a great university, and she was drawn to the classes that explored issues of justice, issues of race, because Rosa wanted to know, why were her local public schools underfunded? Right? Why was there less access to quality healthcare in her community? Why were there different perceptions of police relationships, right, in her community versus others? So Rosa loved learning about that stuff, but unfortunately, in some of her classes, she was also told that Christianity is simply only the white man's religion. That Christianity is simply a racist, classist, and sexist religion that is antithetical to issues of justice and race. So Rosa was very confused. She didn't know who to believe. Who was right? Was it her parents, who she loved and adored and respected? Or was it her professor who graduated from Harvard and who had written many famous books? Sadly, when I met Rosa, she was undergoing clinical depression and seeing a psychiatrist because this deep identity conflict was so difficult for her. This course on the Brown Church is for the Rosas of the world who are wrestling with reconciling their faith in Jesus with their love for their God-given culture and their passion for justice. This course is also for those who might not be Latino, but who love the Latino community, who want to learn more. This course offers a roadmap through 500 years of Latino community cultural wealth. A roadmap for how we can deconstruct our faith in these crazy times where Christianity is so wedded together with ethnic and racial nationalism. How do we deconstruct that and reconstruct a faith that at the end of the day is founded upon the rock of Christ, the foundation of Jesus, God's word, the local church, and that draws us all closer to Jesus and to each other. Students like Rosa occupy what might be called the Christian activist borderlands, or the spiritual borderlands. On the one hand, in spaces of institutional Christianity, they bring their concerns for justice and race, and they say, but pastor, but mom, but dad, shouldn't we care about the immigration system and the way that it's mistreating children at the border? Shouldn't we care about the educational inequalities? And oftentimes, students like Rosa are met with blank stares or even opposition. They're told, those issues, those are Marxist issues. Those are political issues that do not have to do with the gospel. Or other times, let's say in the seminary setting, students like Rosa will say, Professor such and such, how come we're not reading any Latino theologians, right? Or Black theologians or Asian American theologians? And they're told oftentimes in those settings, well, that's okay, but those are contextual theologies. We're teaching you objective theology from Luther, from Calvin, from Europe, from the United States. And so many students of color in institutional religious settings are fleeing the church, sadly. Millions are fleeing because they don't feel that they belong there. On the other side of the borderlands, though, many of these students, like Rosa, who grew up in church, They go to activist circles and say, I want to support the movement, I want to support the movimiento, but they're told, like Rosa was told in her class, Christianity is a colonizer's religion. Jesus was a white man. You're welcome, but your faith is not welcome. In the academic setting, oftentimes the same thing is told, and many of us have to hide our faith. We have to hide our faith, whether it's in our academic publications, whether it is in our classes. And don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about trying to like proselytize in class or cross any inappropriate boundaries of church and state, but even just to say that I, Robert Chao Romero, for example, as a UCLA professor, I'm a follower of Jesus, right? And I want to learn more and research this topic of the 500-year history of Latino Christian social justice. That can be very taboo. So many of us, we're caught in between. We're caught in between the worlds of institutional Christianity and activism in the university, and we find ourselves oftentimes paralyzed. There's several ways that this plays out. I've met many students who just lose their faith completely. That's such a tragedy, especially as someone who came to know Jesus as an adult. The most tragic thing. Some cling tenuously to a personal faith in Jesus, but then just stop attending church, right? And that is very sad as well, because we are meant to walk this faith life in community, right? But I don't blame them, because there's so much hurt built up over the years, so much. And a third option that I've seen is people just give up on justice or give up on ethnic studies and Chicano studies and say, if you're gonna make me choose between becoming an ethnic studies major or leaving my local church, I'm gonna choose my local church and my family. None of those options are healthy options to me. I understand all of them, but our faith in Jesus, our faith, as we'll talk about in the upcoming segments, our faith in the Jesus of Galilee, the God of the marginalized, creates a space where we can bring all of those conflicting identities together, where we can be a follower of Jesus, we can care passionately about justice, and we can be the best top-notch scholars in any discipline that the university has. And so again, the rest of this course will be deconstructing and reconstructing those limited, incorrect views of Jesus and the historic church, and open up a space, again, where we can be faithful to Jesus, celebrate our God-given community cultural wealth, and be on the front lines of justice, whether it be in activism or the university.
Yes, great.
The Brown Church refers to the prophetic Latino Christian community, which has challenged racial injustice in Latin America and the United States for 500 years. The term is a multivalent term, however. It encompasses ethnic considerations, historical, theological, spiritual, and socio-political dimensions. In every instance of injustice in Latin America and in the United States, the Brown Church has stood up against the status quo that has said, for example, it's okay to colonize, to exploit indigenous peoples, to challenge the status quo that has said it's okay to segregate people if you're Mexican or Latino or African American or Asian, against the status quo that has said undocumented immigrants are simply disposable human beings that we can use for labor and then toss them out. In every instance, as we'll see in this course, over the past 500 years, the Brown Church has stood up against the status quo. Next, I want to define brown a little bit, because this is a very controversial term. What do I mean by brown? Even many Latinas and Latinos don't care for this term when I use it. I'm using brown in a metaphorical sense to mean two things. Number one, to express the multiculturalism that is in the Latin American Latino people, the various ethnicities. As a stereotype, people think, oh, all Latinos are from Mexico. Well, Latin America is a beautiful and diverse place with so many different ethnic backgrounds that are part of it. And brown is a metaphor for that. We have Asian Latinos like myself. My dad is from Mexico, Chihuahua, Mexico. My mom is from China. We have Japanese Latin Americans and Korean Latin Americans, Jewish Latin Americans, Armenian Latin Americans, those of the diverse and rich indigenous peoples of Latin America, Afro-Latinos, and everything, Jewish Latinos. And in Latin America, God has sovereignly allowed all of those cultures to come together over the past 500 years. So brown is first of all a metaphor for that. Secondly, brown is a metaphor specifically in the United States for the experience of racial liminality or racial in-betweenness that we as Latinas and Latinos have felt for hundreds of years. So US society, whether it's in the recent political campaigns or it's in church or denominations, in pretty much all categories of US life, it's typically defined by a white and black binary. Right? Our racial conversations are about whites and blacks, right? And have been historically. Well, where do we fit in as Latinas and Latinos, right? And as we'll see over the course of US history, we've been stuck in between as neither black nor white, but metaphorically brown, And from that space of in-betweenness, we have followed Jesus, we have labored for issues of justice, and we have been the local church. And so, again, just to clarify, those definitions of brown church, again, as this multivalent sort of category term to refer to the Latin American social justice tradition. Secondly, brown as this metaphor for racial in-betweenness and this metaphor for the great diversity that is within the Latin American people. And finally, I should say, brown is not limited to Latinos. Brown is not limited to Latinos. Brown is a space, it's an in-between space, a fluid space, and whoever feels in between might also call themselves brown. So in this sense, as I've given talks about the brown church, my South Asian brothers and sisters have said, oh, well, we feel brown, right? And so brown is a metaphor for all of us who might feel in between black and white, in between the black and white binary of US race relations. And as we'll see, Jesus was brown as well. Unbeknownst to Rosa and those many of us who are wrestling in the Christian justice borderlands, the original gospel of Jesus is quite radical and subversive. And we're going to take a look at that in the next session called El Plan Espiritual de Galilee, the spiritual plan of Galilee.